The coral reefs of Southeast Asia support some of the highest marine biodiversity in the world. Known as the rainforests of the sea, they harbor incredible numbers of species, from minute fish to giant mammals. Rare and unique animals abound, and species have evolved to fill every part of this habitat. The Sulu-Sulawesi marine ecoregion lies at the very heart of this rich tropical realm. Defined by the coastlines of Malaysia, Indonesia and the Philippines, the SSME boasts over 3,000 species of fish, many of which are only found on coral reefs. And for the millions of people that call this area home, these animals have provided food and incomes for generations. The Malaysian state of Sabah, located in northern Borneo, has over 1,600 kilometers of shoreline and a large percentage of all the coral reefs found within the SSME. Concentrated around Kudat, Sandakan and Semporna, these reefs have long been prime fisheries for the local population. Today, they are also important for the capture and export of live reef fish for restaurants throughout Southeast Asia. The collection of live fish began as early as 30 years ago, and by the mid-1980s, Sabah had become one of the main exporters in the region. With the growth of Asia's tiger economy and Sabah's strategic location in the center of the Coral Triangle, the export of live fish now makes a significant contribution to Sabah's overall fisheries industry. In 2003, the live reef fish trade in Sabah was worth over $7 million, with more than 600 metric tons being exported by air or sea. For the average village fisherman, 60 to 70% of his income came from the capture of live fish. In cities such as Kota Kinabalu, restaurants selling live fish have sprung up, catering for the large numbers of primarily Asian tourists that visit in search of cheap and plentiful seafood. And now, with the emergence of China as a potential market, the live reef fish trade can only continue to develop. The small-scale fishermen are the backbone of this industry. They belong to the many small coastal communities and often live below the poverty line. Operating singly or in groups with a larger support boat, they use hook and line or fish traps to bring in their catch. Once caught, the fish are transported to holding pens to await export. Any undersized fish are held in grow-out pens, where they are fed until reaching their optimal size. In Sabah alone, over 247 operations have been recorded since 1999. Whilst most of the marine cage operations are of the holding type, there is also an emerging trend towards true cage culture systems, where fish fry produced in hatcheries are grown to marketable size. At present, only a few species have been successfully reared. Tiger groupers, barramundi, and mouse groupers are now raised without resorting to the use of wild stock. Most of the fry is imported from Taiwan, but some hatcheries are now producing tiger grouper and red snapper juveniles commercially. From the holding pens and culture farms, the live fish are distributed to two main markets. High-value species such as humphead wrasse and mouse grouper are packed for export, whilst other fish, mainly snapper, grouper and sea bass, are distributed to local restaurants. Many of the exporters also handle other valuable species such as lobster and mangrove crab. This simple hierarchy conceals a more complicated relationship which helps to maintain the live reef fish trade. Many of the companies involved have overlapping roles, with holding pen owners acting as exporters as well as providing credit and equipment to the fishermen involved. This tight integration helps to reduce costs, supporting Sabah's position as the main exporter in the SSME. Today, the live reef fish trade is an important contributor to Sabah's GDP and provides widespread employment and income to many businesses and communities. The demand for live fish is still growing, and with the continued development of Sabah as a prime tourist destination, the government has pledged its support to this already highly profitable industry. However, Sabah now faces a dilemma. The continuous exploitation of marine resources threatens to destroy the habitats and the very species that the live reef fish trade depends upon. Already, it is becoming increasingly obvious that current fishing levels are not sustainable. The average size of captured fish has decreased, catch per unit effort has dropped, and fishermen have to travel further and further out to sea. By targeting spawning sites and aggregations, fishermen unwittingly damage breeding populations. And not only does the live reef fish trade remove much of the wild stock, it reinforces this problem by emphasizing the value of larger breeding adults. The capture methods used by the live reef fish trade also contribute directly to habitat destruction. Blast fishing is used to collect bait for hook and line methods, as well as to provide food for fish held in grow-out cages. It can devastate large areas of reef, and whilst fish traps themselves do very little harm, fishermen often overturn large coral plates to camouflage the traps. It is the widespread use of sodium cyanide, however, that causes the most damage. As wild stocks become more and more scarce, fishermen must make every effort to maximize their chances of a catch. By using cyanide, hooker divers can target high-value species with comparative ease. Unfortunately, cyanide fishing has a variety of negative effects, damaging the very ecology of the reefs and hence the future livelihoods of the fishermen themselves. The cyanide solution is squirted in front of large fish or into reef crevices, and the coral is then broken to retrieve the stunned animals. This kills a wide range of larvae and smaller fish, and the corals themselves are bleached by even the slightest exposure to the chemical. Coral reefs degraded in this way can take over 50 years to recover. As well as damaging the reefs, these hooker fishermen also run the risk of health problems associated with using cyanide, and by performing long, deep dives without any decompression procedures. By targeting key predator species, the live reef fish trade threatens the resilience of reef ecosystems. By removing the top predators, fish at all the different trophic levels are affected. Slow growth, sex changes, small home ranges, and spawning in aggregations all mean that populations of reef fish are particularly vulnerable to current fishing practices. Reefs throughout the SSME also face a range of other problems. Sedimentation and agricultural runoff smother and kill corals. Coastal development destroys large areas of mangroves, important as sediment traps and nurseries for juvenile fish. And even without the increased pressure caused by fishing and destructive techniques, the ever-present threat of global warming hangs over the coral reefs of the SSME. The humphead wrasse is one of the most obvious victims of the live reef fish trade. These beautiful fish can grow to over 2 meters, and whilst they have never been common, humpheads were previously found throughout Southeast Asia. Prices of over $1,000 for a single fish have provided a strong incentive for fishermen to target this species. Today, only 2 viable breeding populations of these remarkable animals are known to exist in Sabah. If demand is not reduced, they will soon disappear from our oceans. Whilst the importance of the live reef fish trade to Sabah is obvious, it is vital that the industry now moves to more sustainable practices. Without the reefs and their inhabitants, the live reef fish trade cannot continue. It is in the interest of all parties, cage owners and exporters, to conserve and protect the very ecosystems that provide them with their livelihoods. A sustainable live reef fish trade depends on a management plan that is based on up-to-date information and is enforced throughout the SSME. Minimum fish sizes must be established and endangered species fully protected. Spawning grounds should be identified and declared off-limits to protect future stocks. And a maximum sustainable yield should be determined according to current levels of wild stock. To tackle the problem of destructive techniques, widespread testing for cyanide and blast damage must be introduced at all levels of the industry. The introduction of certificates endorsing fish produced by environmentally sound methods would then make it possible to control what can be exported and ultimately how the fish are caught. Education for all is vital. Without the full and active participation of the stakeholders, any management plan is unlikely to succeed. Fishermen need to be shown that using destructive fishing methods not only damages the reef but also their own health. And the middlemen and exporters must be made fully aware of the penalties of trading in endangered species. At the other end of the scale, it is vital that governments of the countries bordering the SSME share information and work together to control this trade. Current demand for live fish in Sabah is already greater than the local supply, and so fish are brought in from both Indonesia and the Philippines. As the demand continues to rise, the effects of the live fish trade will spread throughout the entire region. It is only through cooperation that this lucrative industry can develop sustainably throughout the SSME. Technology can also play an important role. Refrigeration of trash fish on trawlers will mean that hook and line fishermen have an alternative source of bait. No longer will they have to use blast fishing. Improvements to fish handling, as well as disease and pollution control, can reduce mortality rates, increasing the percentage of healthy fish that reach the restaurants. Alternative employment for fishermen can also be developed. Seaweed farming and giant clam production are just two possibilities that have already been developed. Already, the government of Sabah has earmarked nearly 70,000 hectares of coastal area for aquaculture industrial zones, as well as committing itself to research and development of live fish aquaculture. And whilst this industry has its own set of problems, such as pollution, with proper management, aquaculture has the potential to remove much of the pressure on wild fish stocks. The live reef fish trade is of great importance to Sabah, providing employment and income to thousands of people. By shifting towards more environmentally sound methods, the opportunity exists to both protect reefs as well as expand this lucrative industry. Aquaculture techniques mean that both corals and wild stocks of fish, so important to the entire marine ecosystem, can be preserved. And with the cooperation of all, the entire SSME can benefit from Sabah's expertise. Whilst the live reef fish trade is here to stay, it must become a model for the sustainable development of the marine environment and help preserve that which it depends on: the bountiful reefs and fish life found within the Coral Triangle.